Next, Naboth, the chief captain of His Majesty, the grandson of the last pharaoh, next Naboth, had his last resting place in that Berlin sarcophagus of stone. Who was His Majesty? To whom he gave his service as a commander? The question can only be answered approximately. As a grandson of King Naboth, who reigned over the land from 358 to 340 BCE, the end of his life falls about 60 years after his grandfather's death, and therefore about 280 BCE, that is about 50 years after the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great. He could not, therefore, have served either him or his immediate successors, Philip, Arhidaeus, and Alexander II, as commander. We must rather reckon Ptolemy I, Soter, or Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, as his contemporary. The translation of the following inscription of a priest who was contemporary with Pharaohs III and Alexander the Macedon will form a fit conclusion to the history of Egypt, according to the monuments. The hereditary prince, the noble, one of the friends of the seer of Her, the lord of Habanu, otherwise known as Hepanon, the seer of the entities of the nome of Hebanu, the seer of the entity Samta of the city of Ahabu, the chief seer of the female entity and the president of the priests of Sext in the whole land, Samtaoe Tefnext, the son of the temple master and seer of the entity Yemen-Ra, the lord of the city Pasha, Nes Samtaoe Auf Anx, and the child of his wife, Anxet. He speaks as follows: O thou lord of the entities, Knem, thou king of Upper and Lower Egypt, thou prince of the land, at whose rising the world is enlightened, whose right eye is the sun's disk, whose left eye is the moon, whose spirit is the beam of light, and out of whose nostrils comes the north wind to give life to all. I was thy servant, who did according to thy will, and whose heart was replenished by thee. I have not let any city be higher than thy city. I have not failed to impart of thy spirit to all the children of men among hundreds of thousands, which is the most wonderful in all houses day by day. Thou hast for this recompensed me a good 100,000-fold. Thus wast thou diffused everywhere, and wast made a leader for the king's house, the heart of who they consider to be a divine benefactor, was moved to clemency at my speech. I was exalted to be the first among hundreds of thousands. When thou turnest thy back upon the land of Egypt, thou didst incline thyself in thy heart to the master of Asia. His twice 5 friends loved me. It conferred on me the office of the president of the priest of the female entity Sext on the seat of my mother's brother, the president of the female entity Sext in Upper and Lower Egypt, Seterhadab. Thus, thou didst protect me in the battle of the Ionians, in the army of Alexander, whom thou didst rout, the Asiatics, like Darius III. They slew 100,000 at my side, but none lifted his hand up against me. When what befell had befallen, there was peace afterwards. Thy holiness spake to me, proceed to Krensu, Heracleopolis Magna. I will be with thee. I will be thy guide among the foreign peoples. I was alone. I sailed up the great stream I was not afraid, for I thought of thee. Since I did not transgress with thy commandment, I reached the city of Chnensu without having a hair of my head rumpled. And, as was the beginning, only by the one appointment of thy decree, so also was the end, for thou gavest me a long life and peace of heart. O all ye priests, who serve the glorious Khem, the king of both worlds, the Horim-Ku, the Lord of the universe, the good spirit, in the city of Chnensu, the Tamu, in the city of Tanis, the king of the rams, the primordial male power, the majesty of the ram, the male, the begetter, the last king of the kings of the land, the son who loved the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, has departed to the heavenly realm, to see what is there, to see the entity Knem, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the entity Tamu in his shrine, Knem, the great entity in his hall, the king and Nefer. May your name remain forever upon the earth, reaping the reward of honor from Knem, the king of both worlds, and sing ye praise and laud to the kingly entities of Khnensu, and praise ye the image of what's considered to be godlike, who is reverenced and is known, some Ue Tef next. So shall all that is best for be your portion, and another will praise your name in turn for years to come. And the drawing of a tomb at Saqqara inscribed with the name of Semben. And okay, it's not showing too well, but the picture, there's some blocks laying on the side, some inscriptions by the door, inscriptions on the ceiling. Supplementary note on the last pharaohs. Dynasty 26. With the 25th dynasty, Dr. Brugsch's history practically ends, for it was his special object to write the story of the kingdom in ancient Egypt from the evidence of the monuments alone. At this point, their information becomes very scanty, while in the fragments of Manetho and among the Greek and Roman authors, there is to be found an abundance of material, which, even if some of it must be accepted with caution, furnishes us with ample means for laying down the broad outlines of the history of Egypt from the 26th dynasty until its close. The natural historian of this period was Manetho, an Egyptian who was well acquainted with the Greek tongue, and was ordered by Ptolemy Philadelphus to write in that language the history of his native land. He appears to have been both a scribe and a high priest, and thoroughly well versed in language and confirmation of many of his statements. If only the book of Manetho were yet extant, the writing of a history of ancient Egypt would be, comparatively speaking, a light task. But the manuscript itself perished, along with other priceless documents in the burning of the great library at Alexandria. All that's left of it are the list of the kings and some fragments, which, quoted by Josephus in his treatise against Apion, St. Celis, and Eusebius, have also preserved small portions of it in their writings, but it is evident that many are incorrect transcriptions, even if they are not absolutely spurious. The most important classic writer upon this subject is Herodotus, who devotes the whole of the second and the beginning of the third book of his celebrated history to Egypt and the Egyptians. Notwithstanding the many attacks which has, of late years, been made upon the veracity of the ancient historian, modern excavations and deciphering of the text prove that his statements from his own personal knowledge are on the whole to be trusted. Next to him in rank, but greatly his inferiors, are Diodorus, Siculus, Strabo, Josephus, and Plutarch. Psamtik I of BCE 666 to 612, after the Syrian defeat of Erdogan, the son-in-law and successor of Taharqa, which was followed by the sack of Thebes, the country seems to have settled down for a time under the rule of several petty princes. At last, one of them, named Psamtik, the son of Neku, who was put to death by Shabak, succeeded in gaining the supremacy in Lower Egypt. The means to be adopted for attaining his object are so mixed up with tradition and popular fable that it's impossible to do more than assume that it was chiefly through the aid of the Greek mercenaries in the Delta that he gained the throne. To further secure the sovereignty, he married Shep-an-Upt, an Ethiopian princess, the niece of Shabak, thus rendering his line legitimate. The ruins near Sa-el-Hagar mark the site of Sais, the capital. According to Herodotus, this town became one of the most flourishing in the kingdom and was the center of that great revival of art, which is one of the distinguishing features of the 26th dynasty. True it is that it was wanting in that boldness and vigor which characterized the work of the ancient empire, but the ideas were the same, though the results showed the touch of Hellenic influence. Psamtik spent his long reign of 54 years in restoring the temples which had fallen to decay in the troublesome times which preceded him, in fostering art, and in strengthening the kingdom. He made a successful expedition into Ethiopia and reconquered part of Nubia. Then, turning his attention to the internal affairs of the country, he made a treaty of commerce with the Greeks, by which the merchants were to be allowed to settle in the Delta. He enlisted also a large body of mercenaries from among the Carians and Aeonians, through whom he gained his crown. But this so enraged the Egyptian and Libyan soldiers that 200,000 of them deserted and went over to the king of Ethiopia. This information is gained from Herodotus, the truth of which is confirmed by a Greek inscription on one of the colossal figures at Abu Simbel. With the help of the Phoenicians, Psamtik built a fleet and attempted the recovery of the Egyptian power in Western Asia. But he was only successful in reconquering Ashdod after a siege which lasted 29 years. Neku II of BCE 612 to 596 BC. I said BCE before. Psamtik I was succeeded by his son Neku, a king full of energy and very brave, but wanting in prudence. The fleet established by his father was maintained, and ships were stationed both on the Red Sea and at the mouths of the Nile. And by his orders, Phoenician sailors successfully circumnavigated Africa. Neku also endeavored to reconstruct the canal from the Nile to the Red Sea, which had been attempted by both Seti I and Ramessu II. It was cut from the eastern side of the Pelusiac arm of the Nile, a little north of Bubastis in the direction of Lake Timsah, and from thence proceeded in a southerly direction past the western side of the Bitter Lakes straight to the Gulf of Suez. 120,000 Egyptians are said to have lost their lives in this undertaking. Neku then attempted to assert Egyptian supremacy in Asia. The Assyrian army encountered the king of Egypt at Kar Carchemish, the key to the Euphrates, and was completely defeated there. It was on this occasion that Josiah, the king of Judah, interfering, was slain in battle at Megiddo. 3 years later, Nabopolassar, the king of Babylon, sent Nebuchadnezzar, his son, to eject the Egyptians from Carchemish, and thus finally destroyed their rule in Asia. Psamtik II of BCE 596 to 591. There is nothing to be recorded of the reign of this king except an expedition into Napata. Uah Ibra, also called Eprias, and Pharaoh Hafra of BCE 591 to 572. This king inherited both the bravery and the ambition of his predecessors, as well as their love of art. He built at Sais a very beautiful temple with a wonderful portico, before which were erected colossal statues and sphinxes, and for which his successor caused a monolithic shrine to be quarried at Elephantine. 2,000 boatmen working in relays took 3 months to convey it to Sais, but it was never set up in its proper place. It remained at the entrance of the temple. Its external dimensions were 39 feet by 22 feet by 12 feet, and when hollowed out, it weighed over 428 tons. At his accession, Pharaoh Hafra made a league with Zedekiah against Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, which was unsuccessful, Jerusalem being taken and the Yehudi king sent in chains to Babylon. However, Pharaoh's fleet was successful against that of Nebuchadnezzar, and with his help, Tyre held out against that monarch for 13 years. Uah Yibra, I'm presuming it's a Yib or Id makes more sense. But I may be wrong. Don't see the characters, so. Next, went to war with the Greeks, Assyrian, and was there completely defeated. His soldiers afterwards broke out into open revolt and elected Ahmes as their king, who in his turn defeated. The followers of Uah Abra took their king prisoner and shut him up in his own capital. Herodotus, in Book 2, number 169, says that after this the Egyptians took him, Uah Ibra, and strangled him, but having done so, they buried him in the sepulchre of his fathers. Ahmes, or Amasis II, of BCE 572 to 528, was of extremely low origin, but marrying the princess Ankh-Ra Nefert, the daughter of Psamtik II, he thus made his family to belong to the true royal line. He appears to have been a brave and energetic king, and withal prudent. One of his first acts was to remove the Carian and Ionian mercenaries from the Delta to Memphis, where he established them as his bodyguard. He encouraged commercial enterprise and granted Naucratis as a free port to the Greek merchants, permitting them at the same time to settle there. He maintained the old friendship with the Phoenician and conquered Cyprus. He appears to have been on an amicable footing with the Greek states, for the temple at Delphi was burned down in BCE 548. Ahmes sent gifts for its rebuilding instead of continuing hostilities with Babylon or attempting by himself to stem the tide of Persian invasion. Then, rapidly setting in, he became an ally of Croesus, king of Lydia, and promised him a contingent against Kurash. On the death of the Persian monarch Cambyses, immediately attacked Egypt, but Ahmes died at the beginning of the invasion. Psamtik II of BCE 525 was to a lost inheritance that the son of Ahmes succeeded, or after a gallant resistance, first at Pelusium and then at Memphis. Cambyses took him prisoner, and he treated him at first with kindness, but afterward, on a suspicion of conspiracy, put to death the unfortunate young prince within 6 months of his accession. So before we close here, I'm going to try again to show you that tomb from earlier. Sharma, peace be unto you.